My co-organizers behind the scenes are all emailing me good luck right now. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon and good evening, depending on where everybody is. My name is Jeff Abramson. I am help lead something called the Forum on the Arms Trade, which is a network of professionals around the globe, and I'm also a senior fellow with the Arms Control Association. And I'm also coordinating right now the U.S. campaign to ban landmines. But it's not about me. It's great to have so many people already joining in. I see 42 attendees. Talk quickly about the format. We are also live streaming this, and I've sent some emails. We're using the hashtag forward via HD if people would like to engage via Twitter. I have set up the Q&A and the chat so that people can also interact that way. And what we really want to do is make this a somewhat informal conversation. The panelists will speak for a bit, but then we really want to open it up. And I'll introduce most of the panelists in a second. But for the moment, I want to thank the co-sponsors of this event, which include the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, as well as the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. Now I would like to welcome Ambassador Maritza Chan to give some opening thoughts. I had the great pleasure of working with Maritza, I think it's 7 or 8 years ago when the negotiations were happening around the Arms Trade Treaty. And then we each kind of went separate ways, but Maritza was in Washington, D.C., so we were kind of connected for a while, but now she's back in New York working at the UN, and as one of the co-hosts, wanted to give her a chance to welcome us. Thanks, Maritza, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody around the world who's watching us today. I'd like to thank our sponsors, our co-hosts this morning, the international campaigns to ban landmines, and welcome everybody that we believe is an important and timely conversation. Thanks to the Forum of Arms Trade for partnering with us in organizing this event, and to Maria Pia Devoto, Liyanage, Jeff Abramson for joining us and bringing us their amazing expertise and insights. It's an honor to share the bench with all of you. A month ago, the World Health Food Program was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their incredible work. In this time of a global pandemic, when so many are suffering, that award reminding us that hunger is a weapon of war. But hunger, as with the COVID-19 virus, is not something that can be overcome with weapons. Instead, it must be met with a different response that recognizes true security is based on human needs. The recognition is at the heart of humanitarian disarmament. Humanitarian disarmament is at the core of Costa Rican foreign policy, is the engine behind our efforts, is the force that asks us to raise and keep raising the levels of ambition in every meeting, negotiation, and treaty conference of state parties that we attend to. We have made a commitment with humanitarian disarmament because we believe that human beings must be at the center of policy, that security requires human security. The COVID-19 pandemic show us that there is a tiny virus, that the security that we have been investing for so many years did not serve anything to prevent us from this virus. Human security must be at the center of our efforts, and disarmament must have humanitarian disarmament. Disarmament cannot happen in a vacuum. It has to respond to the needs and wishes of many people around the world that not necessarily are possessors of weapons, but who believe that the security and peace is not met by military expenditures, but absorbs levels of military expenditures and investing in the kind of security that did not do anything to protect us from a tiny virus. Costa Rica is a very small country. We are in Central America, and since the mid-80s, we started to promote peace in the Central American region. We learned back then that a shipment of weapons into a small country that has an internal conflict is like a virus in a small room. It cannot be contained. It spreads fast, and it produces many lost decades in my tiny region. Costa Rica was there one of the main sponsors of the resolution that brought about the Arms Trade Treaty that came to existence in 2013. Then in 2014, we were proud to host in San Jose the 5th meeting of the Cluster Munitions Convention. And we were working with countries in my sub-region to declare Central America as the first zone free of those indiscriminate and inhumane weapons. In 2017, Costa Rica chaired the United Nations Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. And we are looking forward to the next Conference of State Parties right after the treaty entered into force. In the CCW in Geneva, our delegation has been working tirelessly in the discussion related to lethal autonomous weapons. And today we were going to listen about an array of initiatives that are underway in the humanitarian disarmament umbrella. One of the key components of that approach is working with civil society and working with them as partners. They provide the expertise. They are the voice of those who are voiceless. And we consider them partners in every single process that Costa Rica has been carried out for many years. In June, the major humanitarian disarmament campaigns, and today more than 250 separate organizations issue an open letter calling on all of us to prioritize human security, reallocate military spending to humanitarian causes, work to eliminate inequalities, ensure multilateral fora incorporate different diverse voices, and bring a cooperative mindset to problems of practice and policy. That's a call Costa Rica is happy to echo. These fundamental shifts to human-centered approach to security is the only way to build not only sustainable agreements, but sustainable societies. So there is much to discuss today. I just returned to New York after being 5 years away. I was back in Capital and then in Washington. So, but I consider myself a humanitarian disarmament expert, and most of all, I consider that that's the ethos of Costa Rican foreign policy and all Costa Ricans that have been involved in this issue. So the floor is back to you. The screen is yours, Jeff.
Thanks so much, Ambassador Chan. That was really great. And as that focus on human security, as well as all the efforts that Costa Rica has done in partnership with civil society, is fantastic. And that's what we'll be talking about today. I want to quickly introduce our other panelists and just let everybody know that the plan is really to make this conversational. I've asked all the panelists to be ready to answer 3 questions, which we'll do together. We welcome chats or questions along the way, and then we plan to open it up to the audience, and we really want to make this interactive. But before we do that, I'd like to quickly introduce, and I'm going to not do her name perfectly, but she'll correct me, Nillasi. Liyanage, that was wrong, sorry. But she is the youth coordinator for the Sri Lanka campaign to ban landmines. I met her very briefly, I think it was in 2007 in Vienna, when she helped present the youth statement. And those of you who were there at that meeting, she got involved sort of while she was in law school and has stayed involved. And last year at the review conference, which I did miss, but she was there, she helped chair a side event and is this year one of the Mine Action Fellows. So really great to hear from her perspective. And then also a friend of mine, Maria Devoto, who leads the Asociación para Políticas, Públicas, or APP in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and is also a coordinator of SEHLAC, which is a network in Latin America, Seguridad Humana in Latinoamérica y el Caribe. My Spanish is sometimes better than that. But she's involved in all these different humanitarian disarmament campaigns and can tell us some what she's seen at the global level while working from her region. So with that, I'd like to turn it over now to the first question. This year has been unprecedented in many ways, and since the pandemic has hit, has just made the world just so much more difficult. But Secretary General recognized this and called for a global ceasefire, which today has the support of so many countries. But I think even more recently, we're seeing real signs of concern there, whether that's in Western Sahara or Nagorno-Karabakh or other parts of the world. But there is, I think all of us recognize that, especially at this time, investments in weapons, a focus that's not on the humanitarian needs of people is really not quite the right way to go, which is what Ambassador Chan was talking about in her introduction. But before we get to sort of what's happening in the international sphere, I want to sort of ask each of the panelists sort of how they're doing. This could be a professional question or a personal question, but we're all impacted in different ways wherever we are in the world by this pandemic. So I just want to give everyone a chance to sort of reflect on that before we move into some of the other questions. Ambassador Chan, maybe I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Nillasi and then Maria Pia.
Okay. COVID-19 has shown us what our priorities should be. Global military expenditure was the highest of the last decade and the highest since the Cold War. And I think that the COVID pandemic showed us that we have been investing in the wrong kind of security. And I think that most of us realize in our personal and professional lives where our priorities should be. In this sense, it's not about resources, it's about priorities and where the kind of investment states, especially small states, developing states should be doing. And who your friends are, what your principles are. That's one of the things that I take away from this pandemic, the importance of having friends, of having convictions, and realizing what's your role in this world. For me, that's it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, hadn't thought of it, but yeah, definitely. Nillasi, would you like to give some thoughts? I may need to unmute you. Hold on a second. Okay, go for it, Nillasi.
Yes. So talking about my personal view on how the pandemic is affecting me, I think I'm more thankful to be safe and to have a safe space to work from, and also to be employed, which is not the case, unfortunately, for many people. And also, if we look at the current week, the MSP is taking place. So I was able to take part in the 70th MSP and the RedCon last year. And this year I couldn't do that, although it's really great to be joining it virtually. I think that it would have been so much better if we could take part in person and see how civil society works in forwarding the humanitarian disarmament agenda, and also to see how these campaigners cross-fertilize each other's campaigns, be it whether they're banning landmines or trying to bring a preemptory ban on autonomous weapons, or whether they're trying to ban nuclear weapons. And what I have seen is that good campaigners are made, they're not hired. So it would have been a really good experience to see how the campaigners in civil society approaches their campaigner. And Jeff, if I have more time, I would also like to say that I see that people from conflict-affected areas and conflict-affected communities are being dually affected by this COVID epidemic. So people, it's kind of strangely similar how the pandemic is similar to being conflict-affected. You can't go out safely anymore. You can't engage in income-generating activities safely. So this is something which affects me profoundly when I see how it has affected the communities that are also affected by these weapons. And I think of my colleague who was looking for a job before this pandemic. She's a mine victim, and it was anyway difficult for her at that point. And now it's going to be even more difficult for her to find a job and to find employment that fits her skills. So it's affected us in different ways.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, and thanks also for that reminder of the impacts and how they really are felt in affected communities. And for those of you who went to the site event on Tuesday, where people from impacted communities were talking about that work, I think we also got that message as well. Nillasi informed me that there's a big storm going on in Sri Lanka, so her feed might be a little bit choppy at times, but hopefully everybody was able to catch that. Maria, do you have some thoughts on what you're experiencing?
Well, thank you very much, Chef. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. The Forum on Control Arms Control, like ICBL. It's a pleasure to be with you, Nillasi, and also with you, Maritza, and all the partners. Well, during this pandemic, most of us have had to stay at home. In my country, we're still more or less in lockdown since March, so it's been a long time. So now we are in summer, so slowly things are improving a bit, and some places start to open. We know that others have gone through really very difficult times, and I think that in this in this Zoom, we are the lucky one that I have I have my job, I have my family, I have my house. And in the early days of the pandemic, and the lockdown, I was so excited that I was able to participate in every meeting, every Zoom, like seminars with really very high level expert that I participate everything. I did like a seminar of 2 weeks time, and we are talking about the beginning, right? And in this kind of seminars and talks, you can participate in the past only if you travel, and you can't travel every time. There's no funds and there's no possibility to do it. So, and I participate a series of talks in some think tanks from Washington. I even signed up for an Egyptology course of the University of Oxford that I never went to. And anyway, I was really excited, and just to see the positive side, by the way, I'm not that excited anymore. I was in a meeting of launch of a participant handbook for parliamentarians, an international launch, and I realized that I saw a very important senator from Argentina. So it was a Zoom. There was the chat, and there was the opportunity to like contact him. So I sent him a private message. Oh, hello, I am blah, blah, blah. I know that you are from like the president of the Committee of Foreign Affairs at the Senate. I said, so I want to ask for a meeting with you. And he said, and this is, okay, this is the mail of my assistant. So you can contact my assistant. And so we set up a meeting. We had like several meetings, and we did a strategy to put some issues and to move into some our specific issues into the International Parliamentarian Union. So I think that is, and that is one thing that is worked, at least for me. But as I said before, I'm not excited anymore. I'm really tired of the Zooms. We have like a Zoom fatigue. And I was thinking really, I was wondering to attend this one, but I am a panelist, so I can't avoid it. So that is how it worked for me.
Thanks, Maria Pia. Yeah, I do remember the early days. To be able to have a Zoom call with people around the world was so exciting in a way, and now it's become a bit routine. But we have people from I don't know how many time zones joining in on this one, and I think we're used to it. Here in the U.S., it's been really tough in many ways, and it's been difficult to think that the work that I do, sort of, which is on the arms trade, is important. But then we had, in a weird way, the social justice issues that came up in this country suddenly made that linkage, because so many of the ways that those protesters were dealt with, in terms, including sort of using weapons that the U.S. government used to use militarily, that has been passed on to police forces here, really reinforced this idea that the way that we as governments and we as people decide to use force is meaningful domestically and internationally. And that's a lot of what is going on in humanitarian disarmament. I'm going to try something, because I want to, and maybe I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to launch a poll here, because it's there's so many of us doing a lot of different work, and I let me know if people can see this. I'm just curious, before we launch into thinking about different humanitarian disarmament processes this year, give everyone a chance to sort of say which ones they're working on right now. So within our group here, I'll just keep this up here for another 15, 20 seconds. And then I can end it and show everybody and give you a feel for who the audience today and the panelists, what of these issues within the broad basket of humanitarian disarmament people are working on. All of these things have different campaigns. So you have the ICBL on landmines, the Cluster Mission Coalition on clusters, ICANN on nukes, the Arms Trade with Control Arms, Killer Robots by the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, Explosive Weapons from INU, and Conflict and Environment with CEOBS, Conflict and Environment Observatory. Let me see now. If I can end this and share results. Can everyone see those? So, we've got a diverse crowd here joining in, thanks to the 27 of us who have responded to this quick poll. I want to now turn us to the question about what's happening this year. We're all engaged in pieces of this humanitarian disarmament agenda. What are you seeing in terms of local and international efforts? How is the pandemic changing that work, which we've already talked about? What are some of the positives learned, as well as things to keep in mind? I don't know if somebody would like to jump in first on this. I'll pick someone unless someone wants to raise their hand. We'll go with Maria Pia. She nodded a little bit.
No, I said like just be my guest. Anyone can jump in. Okay, I start. Well, the situation like took all of us by surprise. What happened this year, and how the ambassador Maritza said before, like there were like some we thought about our priorities, but this surprise is not only for us; it's also for the international community. Was not the exception. And many meetings and conferences, they must have taken place during 2020. So the first possibility, because at first we thought, I don't know if you had the same feeling, that it was going to be like for a couple of months, and so it's just to postpone it a bit. But then when the situation remained the same, there were some cases like you have like different possibilities, and at least this is what the chair at the moment of the GGE on the group of governmental experts on autonomous weapons, like offers to the member states, like just to postpone to 2021, to run it virtually, to run it hybrid, since June, once the General Assembly in the Palais des Nations was open in June, or by written procedure. So that kind of discussion like happened, and different chairs and different process took different path to go through and to go through these commitments. Some of them went well, some of them, from my perspective, didn't went well. But one of the example, it was, as you know, that there were the group of governmental expert meeting on autonomous weapons, killer robots, what we call killer robots, and also there was not certain conventional weapons meeting. It was really, really very disappointed for us that diplomatic talks have been postponed to 2021. And from my perspective, this happened because of two things, like the new measures announced by the Switzerland federal governments, like you can't have like more than 50 people in a room besides other measures. And the other one is in the last CCW meeting on killer robots that took place in September, Russia didn't attend, and but raised like procedural concerns about the legitimacy of the outcome on those meetings, and strongly recommend to the meetings that were planned from 2020 to go to 2022. So 1+1, there's no meetings. And states met since 2014, and this only benefits those states that don't want anything to happen. And the other important process, like in the face of, well, it's more advanced, but in the face of negotiation, it was explosive weapons on public area. The last presence meeting of negotiation, it was going to take place last March, and it was before the Dublin conference to sign and adopt the political declaration. Both of them were canceled, but Ireland showed like a really very positive leadership. Also, the organizations that we are all members, that we are all in INU, and made a lot of effort. We are like a lot of efforts to maintain momentum. And so that's made a situation completely different. And in the case of course, virtual meetings are not the same. The dynamic exchange of view is not the same. You lose like you lose the discussion, you lose like just to feel the mood of the room, you mood perceptions. I don't know if you have like the same feeling, but is this kind of meeting is all the same. Do you listen to me? Do you see me? And that is really very tiring, and it's not, it's hard, and it's not helpful. And this is, but for example, it's very quite obvious if there is no country in the room that this happened, like with Eritrea a couple of days ago in the meeting of the States Party of the Mine Ban Treaty. And this kind of participation limits us, especially civil society, because our work is not only to participate in this kind of meeting, but also to have precise meetings, to have networking, to have a coffee. So all the first, there's a lot of efforts, but we will see what will happen in next year.
Thanks, Maria Pia, for running through a couple of those processes, and some that seem to be working, some others. I think I'll go to Ambassador Chan last. So Nillasi, could you give us a sense for what the perspective is? I think more working at a more national level there in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, I work with the Forum on Disarmament and Development, which is the secretariat for the Sri Lanka campaign to ban landmines, the Sri Lanka campaign to ban killer robots, and also works on issues of nuclear weapons, small arms, and the environment and disability rights. So this one of the main objectives of the FTD is to sort of make the general public aware of these issues. Sometimes it's, even though it affects people profoundly in real life, they also are not really interested in these issues, and our efforts are to make them more interested and to think of these issues as a matter of concern. So because of the pandemic, we were not able to do some of the work that we were planning to do, and this means that real life engagement is low. One of the important things in getting the general public interested is real life engagement, because you see sometimes people are more likely to listen if they're actually in front of the speaker in real life, or are seeing some documentary or some other multimedia which is being presented to them. And so I was more interested in getting youth engagement. And for that, usually how we do that is getting youth from universities and from the media and other aspects to come and join these events. And to get a meaningful engagement, this sort of meetings and panel discussions are very important. So that did not happen this year. For example, we were planning to screen a documentary on Sri Lanka's mine action successes, and we could not do that. That documentary also featured impacted communities and also female deminers, which brings the gender perspective also into light. So these are things that people in the country itself do not know sometimes. And so it would have been very good if that could have been done in person. And also to get the media's interest in this subject, now that the media is overwhelmingly interested in COVID-19 developments and politics, that has become more difficult with COVID. And to talk about another aspect, when it comes to victim assistance, also we see that the needs-based approach is being affected because if you look at Sri Lanka has been really successful in most of the other pillars of mine action, but victim assistance, like in most other countries, needs a lot of work. So we see that efforts which could have been focused on creating a better sort of a better program for victims to be employed, victims to have their agency and their dignity are becoming more obscure in all these other concerns. And also women with disabilities. So they're the largest minority in the world. And this aspect is also getting much more, not getting the attention that it needs. And so that is something that is really concerning, because these people really need extra help to get on with their lives. So, and on the other hand, if you look at positives in the today, and they were able to say that Sri Lanka made demining an essential service, which means that in their COVID response framework, it will be considered as a service which is as important as healthcare or providing essential food stuff and things like that. So that is a really positive approach, which we think is also a sort of a recognition that wouldn't have happened if not for the pandemic. And also demining has continued apart from a small break. And that means the people from affected communities, especially female deminers who are working in the field, can still carry on with their work and be employed and have a stable income, which also has been done with a lot of work on the background as well. So those are some of the positives I see in Sri Lanka. And if we look at the region, I think what is something that we have seen is that it's not the nuclear states that were able to deal with COVID better. It was the countries, this is true for the global picture as well. It was those countries that had a better human security standard that could deal with the pandemic better. So this aspect is something to be noticed by people, which is becoming a more general concern. But I also see that it has not affected the governments that well. We still see that budget spending on nuclear weapons or on defense in general is so much more than on healthcare, for example, or education, for that matter. And this is a trend that I think civil society really needs to address as well. And another aspect is universalization of the treaty and of the Mine Ban Treaty and all other treaties of disarmament. If I remember this incident where we had Vidya Begunawardena from the Sri Lanka campaign going to the Maldives, having a small trip there to encourage Maldives to join the Arms Trade Treaty and the Cluster Munitions Convention. And last year, and that Maldives did accede to the treaty later on. And that sort of meeting is not possible now because of the pandemic. So what we can see is virtual meetings are possible, and that's really good in terms of making these meetings more inclusive. But it also means that governments or policymakers might become less accessible, because it's not like you can go and ask for a meeting or keep asking for a meeting until you get it, but that doesn't happen with a virtual meeting. And that also works in the convention room also. In the meeting of state parties, you can go in from the back of the room and you look at the countries that are there and kind of, okay, I see the country that I want to talk to is currently in their seats, and I go and talk to them. So that does not happen as effectively in this sort of a virtual meeting setting. So that is also something that has changed in this whole setting. And it's generally changed the way we approach all this work.
Thanks so much, Nillasi. I was taking tons of notes, and it's really interesting to think about how the difficulties to do engagement the way that you have in the past, whether that's with states or with people in the country, was really interesting. But to hear that the demining has been made an essential service, that is still ongoing. I had some conversations with some other people earlier this week about how the localized work, especially if it's not reliant on outside, really has been able to continue on in some of the real local levels, and very importantly, that's really interesting to hear all those different insights, and also interesting to hear that from where you're sitting, it doesn't seem like the sort of budget priorities have necessarily changed in the region, which I think is one of the big picture things that we're talking about here. Ambassador Chan, I'm going to call you Maritza from now on. Maritza, what have been sort of your impressions of this sort of maybe at the diplomatic level this year?
It is true, like Pia said, that many conferences were postponed and many meetings did not happen, but also that postponement must be seen as an opportunity to refine positions, to set targets, and to rally like-minded states to push forward certain processes from the BMS 7 to the next review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I think that certain things has postponed or delayed, but they will happen. And we must arrive to those conferences with the right mindset, with our priorities straight, with asking for higher levels of ambition, not to have documents that reinterpret agreements. And we can use this in our favor. If we do organize well and we make sure that those countries who have strong positions are able to convey that message and ask for higher levels of ambitions, maybe it's a good opportunity to rethink, reorganize, and attack again better. We should aim higher, and that's what COVID helped us do. It's aim higher and raise the levels of ambition in the next conferences that we'll have next year. And this year provide us with that opportunity, because we all know now what true security means. That's my take from this delayed in the conferences.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I similarly hope, like you, that next year will be a recognition of these core ideas. It is very difficult, I think, not to be able to go to a meeting and have the coffee in the cafe and have those conversations, that sort of personal thing. I think states are also challenged with that. This letter that we've shared in the chat, this coming together of the humanitarian disarmament community to sort of talk about how this approach is the one to use moving forward, I think was a positive that's come out of this. It's hard to think of positives in this terrible pandemic, but our community is able to work together. We're kind of used to being able to work outside of core meetings, to present these ideas, to talk about how it's important that impacted communities are at the table, that human security is at the center, and more than 250 organizations sign on to this. I think it is part of what we're hoping is people and states take that to heart next year as we move into the next set of diplomacy and work. So the last question for the panel is really what they're hoping for is possible, or what they see is going to be going on next year that we can aim at. And while you all are talking, please, people, continue to put questions in the chat. I'll be looking at those to see where we take the conversation next. But maybe I'll go back to you, Maritza, to start on this, and then we'll go into to Nillasi and then Maria Pia for responses. But feel free to respond to each other as well. It's really great. We have lots of different perspectives.
Jeff and colleagues, I want you to rally with Costa Rica pushing forward Article 26 of the UN Charter. This is the right time, and I see questions in the chat about the correlation between military expenditure and development, the Charter has a correlation and is embedded in Article 26. And this has been a call that the President of Costa Rica and Costa Rica as a state have been raising in the international arena. It's at the center of the statement of the President at the high-level week this year. Let's push together for the Security Council to honor the mandate contained in Article 26 of the UN Charter. We should encourage states to divert the least amount of resources towards armaments and those resources toward development. Article 26 of the UN Charter should be our mantra. It correlates not only to military expenditures per se, but also to nuclear weapons. And that is key. And Article 26 of the Charter also addresses the issue of the trust deficit that I have been witnessing here at the UN. And that trust deficit will have an impact in the outcome of every single high-level meeting and treaty negotiating conference that we'll have next year. We need to address it and change that that energy towards a more positive and wholesome view of the world rather than thinking on zero-sum games. So let's get together working, pushing Article 26 of the Charter.
I'm gonna have to go look at that more closely. That's great. What Maria Pia or Nillasi, I can't remember who I said I would call on next. How about Nillasi?
Yes. So looking at how we can move forward, move beyond this pandemic. One of the things that is very prominent about the pandemic is that it has caused a shift in how people look at security. Although it might not be that in certain regions of the world people might be more interested in their security, and other parts of the world people might not be that interested. But generally, security has become a topic, and security in the sense not not national security or defense, but in terms of human security, how safe you are in terms of your health or the environment that you live in, or generally how the natural environment around you is working, and that sort of thing. So I think this is a better time to make a case for human security, to say that arms or huge spending on armament is not what we want. All that can be spent more effectively on more peaceful and causes that actually makes people as a whole go forward. That is also the agenda that we have. So that I think the role of civil society in that is to make it work, to make this feeling, this perception concrete, and to make it sustainable. And I think that this civil society working with governments and people that should make a push for a collective decision that we will focus on human security more. And I think even yesterday I saw this meme on people referring to human security as more important. So it has become part of popular culture. So this moment is not going to come again. I think that's something we should all capitalize on. And also on the less optimistic side, I see that government priorities are changing. So governments are more concerned with how they deal with the pandemic, COVID response, and the general requirements of that. And it's making implementation of treaties much more difficult. And sometimes it can be used as an excuse, or it might actually be the real case that states find it difficult to focus on things like, say, legislation, because you all know that legislation takes a long time in the drafting, and that's not a thing. And also those matters like strategic reviews, how we review what the framework we have so far and see whether we have achieved those goals. And also things like end dates. For example, on what date are we going to finish our stockpile destruction, or when are we going to finish demining? Those deadlines have changed, and whether we take a realistic approach to that is very important, because there's also the element of funding, especially for third world countries like Sri Lanka, which are developing and need the help of funders and donors. It's important to agree on end dates that everyone, all stakeholders, as well as the government, agree on, have realistic objectives. So I think that's one of the other concerns that we should really focus on, because if there is this gap between what is really needed and what the donors or the civil society or the government say, then in the end, it's the people who are going to suffer. And so that really has to be taken into consideration. And also, having said all that, I think it's also really, really important to maintain optimism. So we see everything is changing. There's a lot of changes that we didn't think. We didn't think that we would be staying at home for, I don't know, for months on end. And this is a good time, I think, to break down our objectives into small chunks and to address them one by one, rather than feeling all burnt out or feeling really dejected about not being able to meet some of the broader objectives that we had. And I think we shouldn't really look at the pandemic as something which is, I don't know, something which is going to change our lives for the worse. We should look at it as a new normal. This is just a way in which things changed, and take our work forward from there. And I think what needs to be done is to maintain optimism, but be realistic also, rather than be too optimistic. I think that's it.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Nillasi. I think maybe when we get to the Q&A portion, I'm looking at the questions and thinking about you just said about maybe shifting of priorities and how we think about continuing this agenda when maybe there's a greater focus on COVID, and how we talk about that, which I see as sort of a nexus of some of the questions. But I wanted to get you, Maria Pia, you as sort of a last shot on this question in terms of what you're hoping to see in next year.
Well, first of all, I don't know if this expression exists in English, but I took the globe that Maritza launched. So I don't know, maybe if you have like the literal translation, you know, Maritza, what I'm trying to say. So of course, we're going to be supporting Costa Rica in this agenda, because if it is a priority, and of course, all of us agree on that, but still, there is some challenge like for next year. So one of those is, for example, this week, the meeting of the States Party of the Mine Treaty is going on, right? So a lot of things happens there. And there are people like participants that are much more expert than myself, like just to be on detail. But there is like some, for example, in the BA victim assistant cluster. So like just we need to empower like the mine survivors. We need to call for the no more use, and we need like for the future. I'm speaking about the future and what is going on this week. We needed to finish the job by 2025, and we have like next week the review conference on cluster munitions. And 5 years ago, we said that we are going to have like 130 States Party, and we have 110. So we need to work also on that, and the Lausanne action plans, it looks well in terms, for example, in gender approach, and there's also like the monitor is being saying that the cluster munition use in Syria freeze for almost 10 years, and we see recently in the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, like from both parties, also Armenia and Azerbaijan. But in terms of autonomous weapons, we don't know what is going to happen next year. We really don't know, because we have the meetings that are postponed, the rep come by the end of the 2021. But no matter what, no matter when or where, we need to be prepared, because we are prepared and our countries are prepared. And I want just to really very little want to speak about the role of Latin America and how this group of middle and small countries, as Maritza said in her opening remarks, where the role of Latin America in every single process on disarmament, on human rights, on arms control, the role of leadership that have, and it's not only a question of number, it's a question of substance. We can see, and I can say to you what is the article with the language put there that came from Latin America. So this need to be the force. The global South need to be the force, and is, it's because of the title of this event. To move forward, we need Latin America and the Caribbean region as well to be that force that work towards. In the case of autonomous weapons is one case, and also in the case of explosive weapons the next years, that is going to happen, this political declaration. There's only if we are going to use the restriction of explosive weapons, we're going to use provision of explosive weapons in population, avoid. So we need to have a strong language. We need to think about the provisions on the long-term effect, the reverberating effects of the explosive weapons. So these kind of things that are and are the things that need to happen next year, that we must to be prepared. And we have a strong civil society in Latin America and all over the world, and we need to be the force. And the people, the participants, we are a nice group and powerful group of people. So I think that we need to do that, and we have our delegates that we work together, SEHLAC work together, and civil society with our governments. So it's a partnership, but we need to be the first. So Maritza.
I just want to jump on that and say that, yes, I think that the voices of the global South are key and instrumental, but also we need to focus on the women of the global South. We need, this is the 20th anniversary of the 1325 resolution and the 10th anniversary of the Women Disarmament Non-Proliferation Resolution and First Committee. The full, significant, and equal participation of women from the global South can make a difference. And I can assure you that we'll have an impact in moving forward the humanitarian disarmament agenda. Working closely with countries from the Caribbean, Central America, Latin America as a whole will have an impact in all the negotiations that we are having right now and that we'll have 2021. The global South can make a difference and will make a difference, and the women of the global South can carry that torch.
That's great and very powerful. I wanted to say something else, but I feel like I would be diverting from a really powerful message here and reminder. I wanted for the panelists to take a look at Bonnie's questions. I think we are starting to answer that in terms of talking about the role of the global South in a way, but maybe we could turn to that question in just a second. I just want to add, in terms of next year, I think it's going to be amazing when the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons enters into force. I think, we've been celebrating that, and we'll need to celebrate that. We haven't talked a ton about the campaign, the Conflict and Environment Observatory, that is also part of this broader initiative of sort of thinking how the environment and conflict and the harm to the environment are part of what we need to think about in terms of human security. I had a quick email with Doug Weir, who helps lead the CEOBS, and he was making the connection that in the Treaty on the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons, you actually do have this recognition of environmental harm there. And you're starting to see talking about the environment being more mainstreamed within mine action as well. And he's seeing next year as a moment where we can continue to make the connections between the environment, conflict, human security. So that as we continue to put people at the center of the definition of how we think about security, that is also an opportunity that we're going to have next year. I wanted to turn to Bonnie's question here to see if folks on the panel wanted to add a little bit more in terms of inclusion. We have, I think, talked about how difficult it can be right now for voices to be able to raise out of communities. Sometimes internet connectivity works, sometimes it doesn't. The pandemic itself is making it much more challenging in the livelihoods of those communities. But let's talk a little bit about that. I think we've touched a little bit on some of the questions that others have answered. We could maybe talk a little bit about the ATT. I'm also cognizant that we're in theory going to go for another half hour, but if we end in 15 minutes, that's fine. We just wanted to create enough space. But please keep putting those questions in, and let me see if anybody else wants to talk about Bonnie's question right now in terms of the importance of inclusion and how we can do that on the ground and in diplomacy. Any takers on the panel? Want to go ahead, Maritza?
Okay, I can go for like a brief reply. It's been very difficult, especially for vulnerable population, to how to work in terms of pandemic. Now that we realize that connectivity and that is important to be part of the world and it's part of the human rights, and we are facing that many communities they don't have, so there is the difficulty. So one thing that we can work on to promote our world as well is just to I'm going like just to make like a really very simple example just to understand what I'm saying. We wanted to have like some survivors to participate in a meeting, and because it's very powerful, the voice of survivors. And of course, there's like the limitations of travel, and also not only the limitations of travel, like the risk of travel in the case like in the case of having a health problem. So what we decided is just to improve the internet connection, to have them in the room, to have them in a meeting. So those kind of simple and ideas are, it's now I am just writing a proposal to get some funds, as always civil society organizations do, trying to survive. And it's incredible because now I am including in the budget internet, not for myself, not for my country, but for other communities. And I am included COVID tests. So to have COVID tests and to have internet. So those kind of simple things is the one that we need to start to think about in terms of inclusion.
Nillasi, did you want to jump in on this one, or should we move to the next?
Yes. So I think what Maria said applies in Sri Lanka also. So this Mine Action Fellows Forum, which I'm a part of, and which I think most of you here would know, is about getting young women involved in the Mine Ban Treaty and other disarmament work. And it's put together by Mines Action Canada, and I think I should shout out to Erin as well for putting it together. So this forum also that was space for mine victims from Sri Lanka to get involved. And this year, even though we are not traveling to the forum, we will be joining the forum through virtual means, and the mine victims also will be joining, which is really good because otherwise they would not have been at the table at all and not getting these skills which are being given to them. So I think that's it's a huge plus point there.
Thanks so much. Before we get maybe to the next question, or I'm going to pull some others, but panelists, if you have thoughts on this, I don't know if we have public health experts within our crew here, but I had all these notes of things I wanted to make sure we talk about in this event. And Maritza, you had talked about sort of the trust deficit. And I'm wondering how, you know, the successes of humanitarian disarmament is because civil society and states work together. You know, we might not always agree, but you know, we're working and pushing each other along. And one of the things that, you know, we were thinking about that was working before the pandemic was, you know, there seemed to be a greater partnership, a greater sort of sense that civil society has expertise, has knowledge, but now we're sort of seeing in lots of places around the world actually a shrinking of you know, more authoritarian governments who are shrinking the civil society space, but also, you know, maybe you know, in my country there are certain civil society organizations the president wants to ban. I mean, there's just sort of an interesting thing going on around the trust level between governments and civil society, and some concerns that in certain processes like the ATT, there might be new mechanisms created where civil society doesn't have as much access. I think that's one of the great successes of HD, is that civil society is a part of the table and the conversations. And we're talking now about making sure that that isn't just civil society writ large, but also people from impacted communities from these weapons. I don't know if you have a sense of whether this year has changed that dynamic, if there's something that can be done to sort of improve that relationship, if it needs to be improved between the way states have trust in civil society and the other way around. It's not a question that's exactly been asked, but it's percolating in my mind as I look at these different questions. And then I think I'll sort of help us wrap up and talk a little bit about some of the other questions here. But I don't know if anybody has a sense of this relationship of the civil society and states and how that can move forward. I would just say before I finish asking that, I feel like civil society has really stepped in to organize a lot of the side events at treaty meetings and other conventions around the world this year. I think that we always do that, but I think, you know, the Zoom platforms now are making this so that we're filling that role in a way that I think might have been missed if we weren't there. But wondering if people have thoughts on sort of that side of the trust equation.
The trust deficit that I've seen among states, and it concerns me as insofar you need political will to get things done here and everywhere. Without political will, there wouldn't be an arms trade treaty. Because of the political will of the non-nuclear weapon states, we have the Treaty on the Provision on the total elimination of nuclear weapons. That trust deficit creates a gap that we need to bridge, and we can bridge it together with civil society. And civil society not only plays a role at the United Nations and with states, it also, you have a role within states. Talking to your Congress people, to your senators, to the decision makers, making sure that there's a shift in policy that can bring about that political will and trust that we need for processes to happen. Costa Rica sees civil society as partners. We are a very small country and we don't have the complete expertise in issues that are high-tech, environment, conflict, drones. There are so many things that we do need your input and guidance. And that can be the case for many other delegations. My take on this is maybe, you know, we can do more in engaging small delegations on key issues and explaining the facts and why certain things are important once you have defined what are that you aim to ensure, or what is the agreements that we cannot backtrack from. I think that there has to be some thought into it, but civil society is a partner and can be a partner for so many other delegations um, beyond Costa Rica. And I think that there are issues that are and delegations dying to count on with your expertise.
Thanks, Maritza. Maria Pia or Nillasi, do you have a thought on this one, or I can move on? Yeah, move on. Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, yes, we agree, obviously. I want to pull the last question here. Stephen Hargarden is talking about, and who I know, it might not be known to many people in the panel here, but as a medical doctor here in the United States, has been doing some amazing work around gun violence prevention in the region. Talking about health leaders and how are they part of how we think about the pandemic and humanitarian disarmament. And it's not exactly the same, but Catherine was talking about sort of within the BWC. She and I had a long chat yesterday. But those are also people who are working on viruses or working on, biological agents. Are we, as a community, is there more we could be doing to make sure that those voices and the way that they approach are also part of our approach? I think they are, but the panelists might not have any ideas on this, but since they were questions here, I want to see if anybody wanted to jump in on this and turn it over. If not, we'll move on. Maria, yeah.
I want just to make a comment. I don't have the response. Maybe it's a good way to start thinking about this, how we can do. But I did with a colleague an analysis on how is the behavior of the countries in their budget, health budget and military budget before pandemic, during the pandemic, and immediately after the pandemic. So we were working on that, and we took China with SARS in 22-23, US and Mexico with H1N1 during 2009-2010, and Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone in the Ebola crisis in 2014 and 2016. And what we see in terms of their behavior in budget is that in general, military, big military budgets and big countries, they don't change their behavior. It's if they spend 10 before the pandemic, spend 10 in the pandemic, and continue spending 10 or more, because in fact increase in China, more after the pandemic. So there's no relation, and that is what related, Maritza, you were saying about development. There's no relation in their national budget on military expenditure at health. That is really quite different in, for example, that countries that receive international cooperation, like the crisis Ebola. It's immediately the year of the pandemic and the year after the pandemic, it was go completely down the military expenditure and go completely up the health investment. And it's more or less similar in middle countries, change a bit. So what we wanted to see is learn from there and how we have to do just to change that behavior and to move those expenditure into health, into development, into research, from the day to night, suddenly scientists became like the more important people in every country. You start to see scientists in TV, in the news. People start to follow here, like the national science office. It became like the most important advisor of the president. We did everything wrong because we are Argentina, but besides that, became like the very top. And that is not the case in other times. So I think that what we need to think is how to influence our leaders to change that mentality of having the budget and investment, because we need to have, we see that it's necessary to invest in science. So how to have like this cluster more open and where to prioritize. If this global pandemic didn't help us to prioritize in personal, professional, and it's the same for the state, for politicians. If that, I don't know what we need to happen like in the, because we've been through everything this year.
It's a good point. Yeah, Nillasi, go ahead, and I think we might close. Yeah.
I would like to add something to what Maria said. So just as international cooperation can make countries change how they allocate their budget to either like for armaments or for health and other sectors, it's also important to make sure that countries continue to have the same policy. Sometimes in developing countries, when the government changes, the policy also changes. And some governments might be open to international cooperation and to more democratic or more peaceful means, whilst other governments would have a more tougher approach where they think that national defense is more important than anything else, especially countries that were involved in conflict and trying to get out of that conflict mentality, or say have people who have strong connections to military in power. So it's not just a matter of each situation or just something that you do in 1 year. It's a long process also where you make small changes, you change the mindset of the general public, and you make the citizens look for leaders who are able to carry on their responsibilities better. So I think it's also a long-term process as well.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks, Nillasi. I'm looking here at the questions that and comments that Robert Neal Cooper is throwing in. He had some earlier ones on the Arms Trade Treaty and now on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, as well as on framing. But I think actually I'm leaning towards us ending here pretty soon. I would just ask the panelists to take a look at those and see if they have any comments they want to add. But I would say, part of what this is, and I think this follows on what Nillasi is saying, is that all these agreements and these potential agreements are works in progress. And the Mine Ban Treaty is now 20 years old, but we're still meeting and we're still pushing. And I think, the ATT has not yet lived up to a lot of what the goals of us had for that treaty in terms of stopping some really questionable arms transfers. But that's, I think, fits exactly in what Nillasi is saying, is that this is a process that you keep going and you keep moving. I think the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which he asked about, I'm not, it didn't have maybe the same public awareness as the freeze movement in the 80s, but I think it built upon the humanitarian disarmament principles, which have been built upon by the Mine Ban Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions. I think this approach actually is working and is making things possible. So that's why I am so excited about it and really appreciate having all these panelists talk about it from many different ways. But I think that that what we're talking about next year and making sure that this pandemic, if it doesn't make people convinced that this is the way we need to move forward, that putting the people at the center of how you define what security is, then they're not paying attention, I think is an important point, which I think many of you are making. I want to close by just seeing if anybody has any last points. We've listened to each other. We've had some great comments in the chat as well as the Q&A. Any last thoughts from any of the panelists, and then I'll thank everybody for participating. Yeah.
I want to commend you for your work, for your expertise, for your convictions, for pushing us to do better, to aim higher, and to raise the levels of ambition. We need you. Please stay by states. Ask us to do more. Be there to guide us. The humanitarian disarmament community, it's an extraordinary community. I commend your work and I celebrate your commitment, your efforts, and we are here to work with you to make this world better, safer, and peaceful. Thank you.
Well, I want just only to say, as we said before, and we can be the force, the global south, the women. There is this panel is really very powerful, and there is a lot of powerful participants, both women and men, of course. And as I said, in all the challenge that we have, we need to be prepared, because it will happen. It will happen no matter what. So it's only just that we need to work together. So thank you very much for convening this conversation, Jeff.
Yes, and I think I would like to bring in the youth perspective into this. So far there has been so much of incredible work being done in humanitarian these weapons have been stopped because even before you're born, people made a decision that we are not going to tolerate this sort of weapons, not for us and not for generations to come. And that is very inspiring for us when we look forward at the challenges that we have as youth, especially with other issues like climate change and so many other issues, which are issues that are not even made by humans. So one of the things that we can do is actually mitigate the issues that we create as humans, such as using indiscriminate weapons. So I think that is something we're really thankful for humanitarian disarmament for being there, and for also giving us a voice to say that we don't want this kind of weapons ruining the future of not just us, but everyone in the world who is going to come after us as well. So, and also the other thing is making the space for women and vulnerable persons to have a voice and say that we have suffered enough and we do not want this suffering to continue. So I think that is the message that I have to give as a youth campaigner and as a young woman. And I would like to thank everyone for this opportunity as well to speak about these things at length at a side event of this nature. Thank you very much.
Wow, I have nothing to add. All three of you, those are some great closing thoughts, and I really do appreciate it. All I can do is thank you all for providing your expertise and your thoughts and engaging in this conversation, to the participants who were not panelists for doing so as well, and to the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica in Geneva, as well as the International Campaign to Ban Landmines for co-hosting this event. There is a video of this event. We've been live streaming. That'll be available. So if you loved what you saw and you want to convince others to watch it, share it with them. And let me just say thank you all so very much.
Be safe. Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Thank you. That's great. Appreciate it.
Okay.